Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Saturday Night Scary Stories on the Scary Stories NYC channel. I'm your hostess, Madeline Starr. The standoff with the evil werewolf continues tonight in Bryan's Lycan Troubles, later in the program. But first, tonight is the big night where Marcia and our hero have to decide whether to perform the ritual that would rid them of Dogman forever. Let's find out what they decide as Life with Dogman continues.
A cold breeze blew, waking me with a shock. Where was my blanket? Sitting up with a start, I realized I was not in my bed. Or any bed. I was out on that rock in the woods, and Marcia was sleeping next to me. We were both in our bedclothes. When was this? I don't remember ever sleeping on this rock before. Don't be afraid, said a voice in my head, and I could smell the body odor of a very, very large mammalian land animal in the very near proximity. The bushes parted, and my heart nearly cracked in two as out from the dark forest emerged the enormous figure of the large, dark Dogman. It was intimidating just being in the presence of this immense creature. He took your breath away. No matter how benevolently he might behave, you couldn't stop being aware of how dangerous an animal this was. This was not like a fairy visitation. This was a large animal that shook the ground when he walked, smelled like the zoo, and emitted body heat so hot that you could probably dry your clothes by him on a rainy day. There was no doubt I was awake, and he was physically there, leaning over me with a concerned look on his dog-like face. I shivered even as he warmed me, and he continued to communicate to me telepathically. Each thought buffeted me like a gust of wind blowing in my face, or at least that's how it felt inside my nervous system. I know there was no actual wind. It's hard to explain. This was not like someone channeling thoughts into my brain. It was some kind of emotional broadcast. I didn't hear words. I felt implications. I was made to understand things. For example, I knew this was the morning of Halloween Eve, October 30th. I knew that the Dogman had brought us there, to that place and time, rescuing us from the time glitches and shifts. I knew that his intention was to keep us locked within that day, which would play out in normal clock time. And at the end of that day, if we made it through, Marcia and I would need to return to this rock to take the seed. I heard Marcia's thoughts. She was awake and with us now. She was stressing about the idea of the seed. What if the seed she had went missing? The Dogman eased her worry and said that he would provide us with more seeds than we needed all day. And again here at the stone at midnight, we had enough to worry about. He would see to it that we did not worry about the seed we would plant within ourselves. I thanked the great beast, and I meant it honestly and deeply. By the same token, I was hoping our conversation was over because he terrified me. I felt strongly that I would miss him after the next day. We had to go through with the ritual. We had to separate our two worlds. But never again would I have a giant black Dogman teleporting me through space and time. No matter how scary that is, it's also kind of cool. and unforgettable too. But you can't have a normal life while living in an active vortex to the Dogman reality, and Marcia and I were committed to healing the rift that night. After the Dogman melted back into the darkness, Marcia and I resumed speaking like humans, finding our voices craggy with sleep. We both had to get inside from the forest while wearing pajamas and in our bare feet, but Marcia had a bigger problem than I did. We were near my backyard, but across town from her bedroom. We snuck into my house through the back as quietly as we could. Our plan was to get up to my bedroom, get dressed, lend her some of my clothes, and beat it back to her place on foot. The stairs in my house creak really loudly. They creak if you run up them, walk up them, or tiptoe up them. It doesn't matter. So we tiptoed, then gave up and ran. We ran into my room, closed the door as quietly as we could, and got started changing our clothes. She put on my old Star Wars iron-on t-shirt from when I was 11, and it fit her very nicely as I recall. I told her to keep it. She also found some old jeans of mine that fit her. They were pretty ragged and also from when I was younger and smaller. We couldn't find any of my shoes that were small enough for her, and we were trying to figure out a solution to that when my door burst open like a SWAT team was making a raid. "Aha!" shouted my shirtless father standing in his boxer shorts, pointing at me, then Marcia, then back at me. My mother was standing behind him, crying in her bathrobe, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "I knew I heard you two sneaking around," shouted my father. "Well, should we have made a lot of noise then?" I asked. "We were trying to be polite and not wake you up." "Why is that girl wearing your clothes?" he demanded to know. My mother burst out weeping, sobbing, and told me she had once had such high hopes for me, and now all this. Anything I could have told either of them would have made no sense. So I told them the truth. The Dogman teleported us to the rock in the woods in our pajamas. We were changing into street clothes so we could walk to Marcia's home and get some sleep. Both my parents just stared at me. Marcia interjected, "I can't seem to find any shoes that fit me. Aren't you my size?" she asked my mother, who took a second to realize she had been asked a question. Are you a size 3? She asked. The two of them left for my parents' bedroom quietly discussing shoes. My father had gotten too confused to remember what he was enraged about and said something like, Well, as long as you're going over there, then. And then he withdrew with a look on his face as though he wasn't sure if he had won or lost that argument. I followed him to his bedroom, where Marcia and my mother told me to go wait for her downstairs, that she'd be down soon enough. I went downstairs and discovered it was a beautiful night out. So peaceful, so relaxing. The calm before the storm of this day that was about to come. And yet, there was a sense of excitement because, wow, once we got through this day, if we got through this day, we were going to have a chance for a really fun life together. So there was a mix of happiness in with the fear. We really didn't know which way it was going to go, but one way or another, things were going to be very different very soon. It was 40 minutes later when Marcia finally came downstairs, and I gasped so hard that I nearly choked. She wasn't wearing my old holy jeans and my Star Wars t-shirt anymore. My mother, who was looking quite proud of herself, had done Marcia up, wearing some of her old clothes from when she was Marcia's age. That was when she had married Dad. Who knew she even had stuff from back then still? Marcia walked up to me doing a mock model walk, then did a spin, twirling her vintage skirt in the air in the process. "What do you think?" she asked. I tried to say something back, but I was blushing really hard and confused. She and my mother both had different priorities than I did, I realized. and I also understood that I was going to have to get used to accommodating their priorities. My mother appeared to be coming with us, and that confused me even more. It turned out that she didn't want Marcia walking around the streets so late wearing her things, so she was going to give us a lift. Besides, the shoes they had picked out were not intended to do much walking. Mom told us to get in the back and that she would play chauffeur. She told us we could be alone and she wouldn't bother us, then proceeded to talk our ear off for the entire ride. She insisted that my father would come around. He would accept Marcia in time. She babbled and babbled, but it was the good kind of babbling, and comforting to know that she was on our side and made friends with my intended. When we reached Marcia's parents' house, we were surprised to see her father outside with a flashlight. My mother parked the car and all three of us asked him what was wrong. He said he had seen one of them. My mother asked one of what, but Marcia and I knew what he was saying. "Mom, thanks for the ride, but you should get home," I said, giving her a kiss on the cheek. "We should get inside," I said to Marcia and her dad. "Well," my mother said, "Marcia, my dear, you're welcome to borrow from my closet anytime, and that's a promise for life." The two of them hugged. I was growing impatient. We were kind of pushing it, standing out there. "As for you, young man," my mom continued, "walk your old mother back to her car, would you?" Marcia and her dad went inside, and I told them I'd be right back. Well, my mother likes to lay it on thick, whether she's sad, happy, or whatever. This was her "I am so proud that you're becoming a man" speech, and she put just as much emotion into it as she had an hour earlier when she was weeping about how disappointed she was in me. I knew this was a big moment for her, so I tried to smile, and I tried to act grateful, but my mind was distracted, and I couldn't help but look around for trouble every second I could. Eventually, Mom finished her speech, hugged me 4 or 5 times, added an addendum to her speech, kissed me on the cheek, and drove off. I watched her until she was out of my sight, and I heard and saw no dogman at all out there in all that time. I turned and walked up the steep grassy incline to the house and breathed a sigh of relief. As much as I loved my mom, she could be as emotionally draining as the entire rest of my life combined. Reaching the top of the hill, I yawned and stretched. I couldn't wait to get some sleep. We were going to need to be extra awake on this of all days. As I opened my eyes after my big yawn, I thought I saw something in front of me. My eyes were blurry though, and I rubbed them, which made them blurrier, and then I heard what sounded like... well, it sounded like something growling. Find out what happened then on next week's big finale of our story on Saturday Night Scary Serials.
We're going to have a special longer episode on the 30th.
That's right, Nancy.
That's the night before Halloween.
And to celebrate, we're putting on the Night Before Halloween special. And we'll all have our own extra scary stories we've been saving up for that scariest of holidays.
Wednesday, October 30th.
We'll all be there. Hope you are too.
It's the Night Before Halloween special, an extra long Dogman Scary Stories extravaganza right here on the Scary Stories NYC channel. Bryan's Lycan troubles continue. Jenny and Bryan wept with smiles on their faces. They had no choice but to smile, yet nothing could prevent them from crying. Their minds were no longer their own, or rather, their wills were taken from them. Their bodies and faces and voices did as they had been programmed to do, while the real Jenny and Bryan sat in the back of their own minds, like passengers in the back seat, far away from their own steering wheels. And then Bryan began to become jittery. He twisted. He contorted. Why was he looking so uncomfortable, thought Jenny, from deep behind her happily smiling face. What exactly was happening to Bryan? Jenny looked more closely at him. Both the real Jenny and the fake public Jenny stared uncomprehendingly as they watched him twist all around and let out uncomfortable grunting sounds. As she, or they, watched, reality began replacing itself bit by bit in different places. It was like one reality glitching out and being replaced slowly by another. This was not like anything else, and the real Jenny was familiar enough with this to know what it was. This was the other kind of lycanthropy that Bryan had, the original kind, the kind that had come before they met this hypnotist Joe. At least, as far as Jenny could remember, this went back to before Joe. This was not the kind of lycanthropy that was set off by stress. This was the kind of lycanthropy that was directly under control of the full moon. Bryan was phasing out one mass of muscle here and phasing in larger muscles there. He was Bryan, and yet not Bryan, as he became the Lycan, and yet not the Lycan. Jenny could sense that her other self had not been prepared for this possibility, or maybe she wasn't even aware of this. Maybe she thought this lycanthropy would have been overridden by the new kind. Whatever she was told, or whatever she thought, she was wrong. Very soon, whichever Jenny there was stared as the smaller humanoid Bryan was replaced by a much larger, much hairier, silverback dogman who howled in agony as the realities replaced each other. Jenny wanted to run to her husband, wanted to embrace him. Instead, she backed away from him to the corner of the room. She would have run out of that place if she could, but the new giant Bryan was blocking the doorway. It now would have been too small for him to even fit through. Jenny wished she could gain control of herself. Her heart ached to be with her man as much as the spirit controlling her feared him. And then the transformation was complete. Bryan, or the original werewolf version of him, leaned against the wall, supporting himself as he gasped for air and recovered from the mind and soul-bending nature of this form of Lycan transitioning. Jenny looked out from the back of her mind longingly. How she wished she could run into his massive tree-trunk arms, covered in that wild, unkempt fur that never made her itchy or ticklish. She even loved the smell of her Lycan husband, noting for the first time that he smelled differently when he was this moon Lycan than when he was human, or even when he was the stress Lycan. This was his wildest form, where he felt at one with nature to her. Heck, he was nature in this form, no matter if it had been something we might consider somewhat supernatural that changed him. Jenny could see that, as unreal and impossible seeming as his transitions looked, they ended up with very real, very tangible, and very physical results. Therefore, in her mind, it was not magic or the paranormal. It was just a kind of biology or science that we didn't understand yet. And it resulted in this magnificent form, this epic beast standing in front of her. It was larger than a bull gorilla. It was taller than the tallest human. It could run faster than any creature in the jungle, and it was the other half of her heart and soul. Except her soul was behind bars, watching silently, unable to participate in her own mind and her own life. Bryan flexed his legs, then his arms. He stretched his back. It was like he had been scrunched down inside the relatively tiny human body of Bryan for the past month, and he was waking up from a type of hibernation. Jenny marveled at the perfection of his form, from his muscular dog legs up to the pointed ears on his werewolf head. He was a monster to others, but not to Jenny. The only place she wanted to be was with her husband, and she was enduring the greatest punishment of her life by being forced to look at him only feet away. Yet no, it might as well have been 20,000 miles of distance between them. As Bryan's animal eyes looked around the room, they fell on Jenny and widened. Trapped inside her mind, the real Jenny laughed and cried at this. He recognized her. He still knew her. Somehow, he would help her out of this trap. Jenny knew hope for the first time in some while, and her mind raced, trying to figure out what she should be doing. Reaching out for his wife, Bryan's immense hand-like claw wrapped around her midsection, grabbing her firmly and yet softly, gently. As her husband pulled her toward him, Jenny felt an ecstatic sensation and found herself sitting up, front and center of her mind again. When he held her, she was herself again. She knew he must be the real Bryan. She knew he must be himself. She was free as long as he was in control. The semantics of it made her laugh, and Jenny leaned up to whisper in Bryan's ear. Bryan leaned his giant, feral, prehistoric-looking monster head down and sideways, angling his ear toward her mouth. In his ear, his super canine hearing heard his wife whisper, "Let's free ourselves." Did the giant beast dogman understand the English words whispered in his ear? Did he understand anything about the human world at all while in that state? How could such a large beast escape even if it wanted to? We already know it was too large to fit out the doorway, right? There's only one way to find out the answers to these questions, and that would be to come back next Saturday night, same dog time, same dog channel, as we conclude the extended saga of Bryan's Lycan Troubles.
Come see those American girls perform semi-live in hologram form on stage at the next Northeast Comic-Con. Meet Batman villains from the Gotham TV show. Watch Will Brierly's artificially intelligent cartoon character interview celebrities. See Debbie, Sophie, Alicia, and Chibi perform on stage. All this plus so much more.
Breaking news just added to the show are these stars: Dana DeLorenzo, star of Ash vs. the Evil Dead, the greatest horror comedy series that will ever be. Shake the hand that ended the second lives of so many Deadites. Also, Marty Ross of the New Monkees, Denny Lane from Wings and the Moody Blues, co-writer of Mull of Kintyre. He will actually come hang out with us mortals.
Hosted by the king of pop culture himself, Gary Summers. That's the last weekend of November 2019 in Boxborough, Massachusetts, home of the Wolf People.
Hey, it's me, Henry Lee Dogman, here to thank those of you who support all of us here at Scary Stories NYC. It really helps us if you click like and if you forward our videos or leave cool comments. If you can, it helps us even more when you let us share our 25 episode and growing collection of uncensored, scary Dogman stories with you by becoming a paid subscriber at peterbernard.com. That's right, join our monthly club and get 25 stories right off the bat, each of them wilder than what we're allowed to tell you on this channel. Then, each Sunday, get another new scary story, usually a Dogman story, but always uncensored and secret, available nowhere else on the planet. Please consider joining us today at peterbernard.com and keep the scary stories coming. Thanks, everyone.